The flight attendant spun around. Her smile died instantly.
Excuse me, could I get a glass of water, please? Water.
Don't touch that call button with your filthy hands. God knows where they've been.
She stepped closer.
You smell like you crawled out of a gutter. This is first class, not whatever roach-infested dump you came from.
She leaned in, nose wrinkled.
Move to the back where you belong, before I have security drag you out. Like the trash you are.
A man in row 3 smirked. A woman across the aisle started filming. Not to help. Then the flight attendant raised her hand and slapped the black woman across the face. The cabin went dead silent, but not one soul on that plane knew who was sitting in seat 2A. And in just a few minutes, every single person who laughed, filmed, and looked away would be begging for forgiveness. 6 hours earlier, the world looked nothing like the inside of that airplane. Washington, D.C., 5:30 in the morning. The sun hadn't cracked the horizon yet. The streets were still dark and quiet. Most of the city was asleep, but Wanda Palmer was already at her desk. She sat in her home office on the second floor of a modest brick townhouse in Georgetown. A single lamp glowed beside her laptop. A mug of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, sat within arm's reach. She'd been up since 4:45. Wanda was 46 years old, black, tall, sharp-featured, with deep brown eyes that never seemed to miss anything. She wore her hair in a neat twist, simple gold studs in her ears, and not a single piece of flashy jewelry on her body. She didn't need any of that. Because Wanda Palmer was the vice president of operations for Silver Line Airways, one of the largest regional carriers in the United States. Every safety protocol, every training manual, every service standard on every Silver Line flight in the country, her signature was on all of them. Every flight attendant, every ground crew supervisor, every cabin service manager reported up through her chain of command. But if you saw her on the street, you'd never guess it. That was intentional. 4 times a year, Wanda booked a seat on a random Silver Line flight. She used her personal name. No corporate title, no VIP escort, no pre-boarding. She dressed simply, moved quietly, and watched everything. These were her unannounced quality audits, and they were the reason Silver Line's service standards had improved 32% in 3 years. She picked up her phone. Her assistant, a young man named Dennis Crawford, was already on the line. Flight 1042 confirmed, Ms. Palmer. Reagan to Atlanta, first class, seat 2A. Departure at 11:15. Crew has no idea you're on the manifest. Good, Wanda said. That's exactly how I want it. She closed her laptop and stood. On the wall behind her hung 3 framed photographs. The first showed her mother, a schoolteacher from Tuskegee, Alabama, who spent 40 years teaching children to read. The second was her father, one of the first black air traffic controllers in Virginia, hired in 1971 when most people in the tower didn't think a black man could handle the job. The third photo was Wanda herself, standing on a tarmac in front of a Silver Line jet, the day she was promoted to VP. She looked at her mother's picture for a long moment. Then she picked up her travel bag and headed for the door. Reagan National Airport was already buzzing when she arrived. Morning rush, suits and roller bags, coffee lines stretching past the bookshop, the sharp smell of espresso and floor cleaner mixing in the terminal air. Wanda moved through TSA like everyone else. No fast lane, no special badge. She stood in line. She took off her shoes. She waited. At gate 14, she found a seat near the window and opened a book. That's when the crew arrived. 4 flight attendants and 2 pilots walked past the gate desk in their pressed Silver Line uniforms. One of them caught Wanda's attention immediately. A blonde woman, early 30s, loud voice, big smile, but only for certain people. Her name tag read, B. Caldwell. Brenda Caldwell was talking to another attendant as they passed a black family, a mother and 2 young children, sitting near the boarding area. "I swear," Brenda said, not even lowering her voice, "every flight gets worse. You can always tell which ones are going to be a problem before we even take off." She didn't name anyone. She didn't have to. Her eyes did it for her. The other attendant, a quieter brunette named Donna Sweeney, looked down at her shoes and said nothing. Wanda watched all of this over the top of her book. She didn't react. She didn't write anything down. Not yet. But she remembered every word. Boarding began at 10:50. Group 1 was called first. Wanda stood, tucked her book into her leather carry-on, and joined the line. She moved quietly. No rushing, no cutting ahead. Just a woman with a boarding pass waiting her turn. The jet bridge smelled like recycled air and rubber. The narrow tunnel funneled passengers single file toward the aircraft door. The carpet under her shoes was worn thin from 1,000 footsteps a day. She stepped onto the plane. The first-class cabin was small, 12 seats arranged in pairs, cream leather, warm overhead lighting, the faint scent of fresh linen from the pillow sets on each seat. A soft jazz playlist hummed from the cabin speakers. Wanda turned left toward row 2. And that's when Brenda Caldwell stepped directly into her path. Brenda had positioned herself at the front of the cabin with a beverage cart angled sideways, half blocking the aisle. She was smiling at a white man in a gray suit settling into seat 1A. "Welcome aboard, sir." "Can I get you anything before we take off? Sparkling water, orange juice? We have a lovely pre-departure champagne today." The man smiled back. "Champagne sounds wonderful." "Coming right up." Brenda touched his shoulder lightly as she turned. Her fingernails were painted bright red. Everything about her performance was polished and warm. Then she saw Wanda. The smile disappeared. Not slowly. It dropped off her face like someone flipped a switch. Her eyes moved up and down Wanda's body with the kind of look a person gives something stuck to the bottom of their shoe. "Excuse me." Brenda's voice was flat, cold. "The economy is toward the back. This is first class." Wanda held up her boarding pass. "Seat 2A, first class." Brenda stared at the pass like it was written in a foreign language. Then she took it from Wanda's hand, not asked for it, took it, and held it under the overhead light. Her fingers pinched the corner like she didn't want to touch too much of it. She turned it over, tilted it sideways, squinted at the barcode. "These get mixed up at the gate sometimes," Brenda said. "Let me verify this." "It's correct," Wanda said calmly. "I'll verify it anyway." Brenda walked away with the boarding pass. She didn't go to the gate agent. She walked to the galley where Donna Sweeney was organizing beverage trays. Wanda could see them from where she stood. Brenda held up the pass and whispered something. Donna glanced toward Wanda. Her face tightened. She whispered something back. Brenda shrugged and rolled her eyes so hard her whole head moved. 30 seconds. 45. A full minute. Then 90 seconds. Passengers lined up behind Wanda. A man sighed loudly. A woman with a rolling bag shifted her weight. Someone muttered about the boarding process. The line stretched back to the aircraft door. She didn't move. She didn't complain. She stood perfectly still. Finally, Brenda returned. She handed the boarding pass back at arm's length, like returning something contaminated. No apology. No welcome. No smile. "You can sit down," Brenda said. Then she turned her back and walked away. Wanda took her seat. She placed her carry-on beneath the seat in front of her, buckled her seatbelt, adjusted the air vent. The cool stream of recycled air hit her forehead. Through the oval window, ground crew loaded luggage below. Orange vests, heavy gloves. The sharp clang of metal containers sliding into the cargo hold. 30 seconds later, a white man in his 50s settled into seat 2B. He wore a pressed Oxford shirt and reading glasses on his forehead. He barely sat down before Brenda appeared at his side. "Welcome aboard, sir. Here's your menu. Can I start you with a drink? We have a lovely pre-departure champagne." The man smiled. "Sure, why not?" "Wonderful." Brenda patted the armrest with familiar warmth and walked away humming. She did not acknowledge Wanda. Not a glance, not a word. As if the seat were empty. As if Wanda were made of air. Wanda pulled out a small leather notebook. She opened to a blank page and began writing. Date, flight number, time, crew member name, specific behavior observed. Then she took out her phone, opened the voice memo app, pressed record, set the phone face down on the armrest, microphone pointing toward the aisle. Washington, D.C. was a one-party consent jurisdiction. Only one person needed to know the recording was happening. That person was Wanda. In seat 1C, an older white man with silver hair and a Navy veteran pin on his blazer had been watching everything. His name was Gerald Henson, 63, retired attorney. He hadn't said anything, but his jaw was tight and his knuckles were white on the armrest. A few rows back, another passenger boarded, a young black woman in her mid-20s wearing a Howard University sweatshirt. Her name was Tanya Brooks. She had a seat in row 3. Tanya stepped into the aisle and pulled out her boarding pass. Before she could look for her row, Brenda appeared. "ID, please?" Tanya blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Your identification. Photo ID along with your boarding pass." Tanya fumbled through her backpack with shaking hands. She pulled out her driver's license and held it up. Brenda took both. She studied the license for several seconds, looked at Tanya, looked at the photo, looked at Tanya again. Tilted the license under the light. "This doesn't look like you," Brenda said. "It's me," Tanya whispered. "I just changed my hair." Brenda stared for 3 more seconds. Then she handed back the documents. No apology, no smile. Just a cold look and a half-step sideways to let Tanya squeeze past. Tanya slid into row 3 and stared at her hands in her lap. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes were glassy. Wanda watched every second from seat 2A. Not one white passenger had been asked for ID. The champagne man in 1A, no ID. The suit in 1B, no ID. The man in 2B, no ID. A white woman with a toddler, no ID. A college kid in a backwards cap, no ID. Only the 2 black women had been questioned. Only the 2 black women had been made to prove they belonged. Wanda picked up her pen and wrote another line in her notebook. She underlined it twice. The cabin filled. Families with children, business travelers with laptops. The sounds of overhead bins slamming, jackets rustling, the seatbelt sign flickering on. Through it all, Brenda moved up and down the aisle like she owned the aircraft. Warm greetings for some, cold silence for others. The pattern was so consistent it could have been charted on a graph. An elderly white couple received pillows and blankets before asking. A black man in a sport coat was told his overhead bin was reserved for first-class luggage, even though he was sitting in first class. He moved his bag without a word, his jaw clenched tight. Donna Sweeney worked the other side, polite to everyone, but she never corrected Brenda, never stepped in, never said a word. She kept her head down and her mouth shut. The plane pulled back from the gate at 11:18, 3 minutes late. The engines spooled up with a deep whine vibrating through the floor. The safety demonstration played overhead. Brenda performed the hand motions with exaggerated precision, smiling at the passengers she liked, looking through the ones she didn't. Wanda watched the tarmac slide past, runway lights blinking, the smell of jet fuel through the vents. The plane turned, paused, surged forward. The wheels lifted at 11:31. Flight 1042 was airborne. And everything that happened next would be recorded. Cruising altitude, 32,000 feet. The seatbelt sign dimmed with a soft chime. Passengers shifted in their seats. Laptops opened. Neck pillows inflated. The cabin settled into that strange, suspended quiet that only exists inside an airplane. The low drone of engines, the whisper of circulated air, the occasional cough from somewhere behind row 12. Wanda pressed the call button above her seat. A small orange light blinked on. A soft chime sounded through the cabin, the universal signal that a passenger needed assistance. 1 minute passed. Brenda was standing in the forward galley, leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up at the blinking light. She saw which seat it came from. She looked back down at her phone and kept scrolling. 2 minutes passed. The light kept blinking. The soft chime had long faded, but the orange glow pulsed steadily above seat 2A, like a tiny heartbeat nobody wanted to acknowledge. Wanda did not press it again. Not yet. She sat still with her hands folded in her lap, watching, waiting, counting every second in her head, recording every second on her phone. 3 full minutes. Gerald Henson in 1C noticed. He looked up at the blinking light. He looked toward the galley where Brenda stood. He looked at Wanda. His jaw tightened and his mouth pressed into a hard, thin line. Finally, Wanda pressed the button a second time. Brenda let out a sigh loud enough to carry 2 rows deep. She tucked her phone into her apron pocket and walked toward seat 2A with the enthusiasm of someone approaching a task she found revolting. What? Not what can I help you with, not how may I assist you, just the single word, flat, irritated, barely even shaped like a question. "I'd like a glass of water, please," Wanda said, "and a menu for the meal service." Brenda crossed her arms over her chest. "Meal service already came through." Wanda looked toward the galley. The meal cart was sitting right there, still sealed. The aluminum foil covers on the trays were untouched. No steam, no movement. That cart had not rolled a single inch since takeoff. "The cart hasn't moved," Wanda said. Her voice was calm, measured, the tone of someone stating an observable fact. Brenda didn't flinch. "First-class meals are served on a first-come basis. You must not have been paying attention when I came around." She never came around. Wanda knew it. Brenda knew it. The man in 2B knew it. He glanced sideways at Wanda with a tight, uncomfortable expression and said absolutely nothing. "I see," Wanda said. "Then just the water, please." Brenda spun on her heel and marched to the galley. She poured water into a plastic cup. She walked back and set it on Wanda's tray table, not gently, not with care, but with a sharp clack that sent a cold splash over the rim and onto Wanda's cream blouse. A dark, wet circle bloomed on the fabric just above her elbow. Brenda did not apologize. She did not offer a napkin. She did not even pause. She simply turned and walked away as if she had completed an unpleasant errand. Wanda looked down at the wet spot spreading on her sleeve. She blotted it with her own tissue from her bag. She picked up her pen and wrote another line in the notebook. Time. Description. Exact words spoken. 15 minutes passed. The cabin hummed with quiet routine. Then the meal cart finally moved. Donna Sweeney wheeled it carefully down the aisle. She served every first-class passenger a tray with a polite nod. When she reached 2A, she placed Wanda's tray gently on the table and said softly, "Here you go, ma'am. Sorry for the wait." It was the first time any crew member had addressed Wanda like a human being since she stepped onto this aircraft. 6 words that carried the weight of an apology Donna couldn't fully give. Wanda nodded. "Thank you, Donna." After the meal trays were collected, Wanda needed her laptop. She had operational reports to review before landing. Her bag was in the overhead bin directly above her seat. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up carefully. She reached up and pressed the silver latch on the bin. Brenda appeared from nowhere. She closed the distance in 3 fast steps, faster than she had moved for anything else the entire flight. She slammed both palms against the overhead bin and shoved it shut. The heavy plastic panel banged closed with a crack that echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. The edge missed Wanda's fingers by less than half an inch. Wanda yanked her hands back. She felt the rush of displaced air across her fingertips. Her pulse spiked for the first time all flight. "Passengers need to remain seated during active service," Brenda snapped. Her voice was loud and sharp, and meant for an audience. Wanda looked around the cabin. There was no active service. The meal cart was stowed. Donna was collecting napkins near row 6. The aisle was completely empty. "There's no service happening," Wanda said. "I determine when service is active on my aircraft," Brenda said. She planted herself in the aisle with her shoulders squared and her chin lifted. "Sit down." Wanda did not sit. She met Brenda's eyes. "I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant, please." Brenda stepped closer, close enough that Wanda could smell the synthetic vanilla of her lotion and the staleness of reheated coffee on her breath. Close enough that their faces were barely 18 inches apart. "I am the lead flight attendant on this aircraft." Each word came out slow and hard and soaked in authority. "So if you've got a problem, you can scribble it on a comment card when we land. Until then, sit down, stay quiet, and stop making this flight difficult for everyone else." Wanda held the stare for 3 seconds. Then she lowered herself back into her seat. She picked up her pen. Her handwriting was still steady. Not a single letter shook. But the atmosphere in the cabin had changed. The air felt thicker, tighter. Several passengers were watching openly now. Several Henson had rotated fully in his seat. His reading glasses were off, and his eyes were locked on Brenda. Tanya Brooks in row 3 gripped both armrests so hard her knuckles ached. A couple in row 4 had their phones resting on their tray tables, screens dark but cameras ready. 10 minutes of tense silence crawled past. Then Wanda stood again. She needed that laptop bag. She had a job to do and every right to access her own luggage in her own overhead bin on a flight she had paid for. She reached up and pressed the latch. This time Brenda grabbed her. Not her sleeve, not a tap on the shoulder. Brenda's fingers wrapped around Wanda's left wrist and wrenched it downward, hard. The grip was tight enough to leave marks. Wanda felt the pressure compress against bone. "I told you to stay seated," Brenda hissed through clenched teeth. Her face was red. A vein pulsed on the side of her neck. "Let go of me," Wanda said. "Sit down. Let go of my arm right now." The struggle lasted 4 seconds. Wanda pulling back, Brenda yanking down, bodies twisting in the narrow aisle between leather seats. Then Brenda's right hand released its grip, swung upward in a wide arc, and came down, open palm, full force, across the left side of Wanda's face. The sound cut through the cabin like a crack of lightning. Sharp, unmistakable. The sound of skin striking skin at full speed. Every conversation died. Every screen dimmed. Every pair of eyes in the first-class cabin locked onto row 2. Wanda's head had snapped sideways from the impact. A red welt was already rising on her left cheek. She brought her hand up slowly and pressed her fingers to the spot where Brenda's palm had landed. The skin was hot. Her fingertips came away tingling. She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not lunge. She lowered her hand and sat back down in her seat with the devastating calm of a woman who had already won a war the other side didn't know had started. Silence. Total, absolute silence. 12 first-class passengers frozen in place. Gerald Henson broke it first. He rose from one seat with his face flushed crimson from collar to forehead. His voice shook with barely controlled fury. "What the hell did you just do to that woman?" Brenda was breathing hard. Her chest heaved. Her eyes darted across the cabin, scanning for allies, for validation, for anyone who looked like they agreed with her. She found nothing but stares. She pointed at Wanda and raised her voice loud enough to reach economy. "She was non-compliant and aggressive. I restrained her for the safety of everyone on this flight. She has been a problem since she sat in a seat she has absolutely no business being in." Row 4 was filming. 2 phones raised in steady hands, red recording dots glowing like small, unblinking eyes in the dimmed cabin light. Every word Brenda spoke was being captured in high definition. Tanya Brooks in row 3 was crying without sound, tears sliding down her face and dropping onto the Howard University letters on her sweatshirt. She wasn't crying from shock. She was crying from recognition. Because she had been in rooms and buses and stores where this exact thing happened, and nobody ever did a single thing about it. Brenda smoothed the front of her uniform with both hands. She straightened her name badge. She pointed at Wanda one final time with a steady, manicured finger. "When we land, security will be waiting. For you. Not me." Then she turned and walked back toward the galley with the posture of a woman who believed she had just restored order to her aircraft. Wanda sat still. Her phone continued recording on the armrest. Her notebook remained open. The mark on her cheek was deepening from pink to a dark, angry crimson that spread toward her jawline. She closed her eyes. She took one long breath in through her nose. She held it. She released it slowly through parted lips. Then she opened her eyes, and she waited. The cockpit door opened. It wasn't a slow, cautious opening. It swung wide with purpose. Captain James Whitfield stepped through the narrow frame and into the first-class cabin. He was tall, broad-shouldered. Silver streaks ran through his dark hair above both temples. His uniform was pressed sharp enough to cut glass. 4 gold stripes gleamed on each sleeve. He had been alerted 90 seconds earlier. Donna Sweeney had picked up the intercom in the rear galley, pressed the cockpit call button, and whispered 3 words. "We have a problem." Now he stood in the aisle, scanning the cabin with the practiced eyes of a man who had flown commercial aircraft for 28 years. He saw passengers frozen in their seats. He saw 2 phones raised and recording. He saw Gerald Henson standing in the aisle near row 1 with his fists clenched at his sides. Then he saw Wanda. She was sitting in 2A, hands folded, back straight. A dark red mark spread across her left cheek, like a bruise already forming under the skin. Captain Whitfield's expression changed. Not dramatically, not with a gasp or wide eyes. It changed the way a steel door closes. Slow, heavy, and final. His jaw locked, his shoulders squared, his eyes narrowed into something between recognition and controlled fury. He knew that face. He had seen it across a conference table at Silverline's annual leadership summit in Dallas. He had seen it on the cover of the company's internal magazine. He had shaken that hand at a crew safety awards dinner in Chicago where she gave the keynote speech. He had sat in a training session she personally redesigned after a string of passenger complaints 2 years ago. He knew exactly who was sitting in seat 2A. Brenda came walking up from the galley. She had fixed her hair and straightened her apron. She wore the expression of someone ready to file a report, confident, justified, already composing the version of events that made her the hero. "Captain, I'm glad you came out. The passenger in 2A has been disruptive and non-compliant since boarding. I was forced to physically intervene for cabin safety. I've already told her that security will meet her at the gate." She said it all without hesitation, rehearsed, polished, every word designed to build a wall between herself and blame. Captain Whitfield did not look at Brenda while she spoke. He kept his eyes on Wanda. When Brenda finished, the silence that followed lasted 5 full seconds. Then he turned to Brenda. "Do you know who this passenger is?" Brenda blinked. The question clearly wasn't what she expected. She's a passenger in 2A who has been..." "Do you know her name?" No, I don't know her name. That's not the point." "Her name," Captain Whitfield said, "is Wanda Palmer." The name hung in the air. Brenda's mouth stayed open, but no sound came out. Her brow creased like she was trying to place it. Captain Whitfield continued. His voice was steady and clear, and loud enough for every person in first class to hear. "Wanda Palmer is the Vice President of Operations for Silver Line Airways. She oversees every safety protocol, every training manual, and every service standard on this airline. She is the reason you have a crew handbook. She is the reason you went through recertification last March." He paused, let the words settle like stones dropped into still water. "She is, effectively, our boss." Brenda's face went white, not pale, white. The color drained from her cheeks so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug beneath her skin. Her lips parted. Her hands began to tremble at her sides. The confident posture collapsed like a building losing its foundation. Shoulders dropping, spine curving, chin falling toward her chest. I didn't..." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know who she..." "That," Wanda said quietly from her seat, "is exactly the problem." Every head in the cabin turned toward her. Wanda looked up at Brenda. Her eyes were steady. Her voice carried no anger, no shouting, no venom. Just a calm, factual weight that was somehow worse than all of those things combined. "You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with basic human dignity. You shouldn't need to see a title or a badge or a business card to decide that a passenger deserves a glass of water, or a meal, or to open her own luggage without being assaulted." Brenda's eyes filled with tears. Her mouth moved, but nothing came out. She looked at Captain Whitfield. She looked at the passengers. She looked at the phones still recording. She found no rescue anywhere. Captain Whitfield stepped aside and gestured toward the rear of the aircraft. "Miss Caldwell, you are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. You will remain in the aft galley, and you will not interact with any passenger. Ground security and a corporate HR representative will meet this aircraft when we land." Brenda opened her mouth one more time. "Captain, if I could just..." "That is not a request. Go. Now." Brenda turned. Her heels clicked against the cabin floor. Unsteady, uneven, nothing like the sharp, confident rhythm from before. She walked past row 3, where Tanya Brooks sat watching with wet eyes. She walked past row 4, where 2 phones tracked her every step. She disappeared through the curtain into the economy. She did not come back. Gerald Henson lowered himself into his seat. He pulled a business card from his wallet and leaned across the aisle toward Wanda. "Ma'am, my name is Gerald Henson. I'm a retired attorney. I witnessed everything from the moment you boarded. Whatever you need, a statement, a deposition, testimony, you have it." Tanya Brooks stood from row 3. Her voice was shaking but clear. I saw everything too. The ID check, the way she treated you, all of it. I'll testify. The man in 2B finally spoke for the first time. His face was pale with shame. I should have said something earlier. I'm sorry. I'll give a statement too. Wanda looked at each of them. She nodded once. Thank you. Then she picked up her notebook, turned to a fresh page, and began writing her official incident report at 32,000 feet. The wheels touched down in Atlanta at 1:42 in the afternoon. The tires screeched against hot asphalt. The engines roared into reverse thrust. The cabin rattled and shook as the aircraft slowed from 150 miles per hour to a crawl. Nobody in first class moved to unbuckle their seatbelt. Nobody reached for the overhead bins. Nobody stood up. The cabin felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. The plane taxied to gate B-16. The jet bridge extended and locked against the fuselage with a heavy metallic thud. The door opened, and warm Georgia air rushed into the cabin. Humid, thick, carrying the faint smell of diesel and summer rain. 2 Silver Line security officers stepped on board first. They wore dark suits and company ID badges clipped to their breast pockets. Behind them stood a woman in a navy blazer with a leather portfolio under her arm. Her name was Carolyn Davis, Senior Director of Human Resources for Silver Line Airways. She had driven straight from the corporate office the moment Captain Whitfield's in-flight report reached the Ground Operations Center. Carolyn looked at the captain. He tilted his head toward the rear of the aircraft. The 2 security officers walked down the aisle. Every passenger watched them pass. The officers disappeared through the curtain into economy. 30 seconds later, they returned with Brenda Caldwell walking between them. Brenda's face was blotchy and swollen from crying. Her mascara had streaked in 2 dark lines down her cheeks. Her hands were clasped together in front of her body like she was holding herself in one piece. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor. She did not look at a single passenger as she was escorted past first class and off the aircraft. She was gone. Carolyn Davis approached seat 2A. She crouched slightly so she was at eye level with Wanda. Her voice was low and professional, but her eyes carried something more personal, a quiet fury that she kept carefully behind her teeth. Ms. Palmer, on behalf of Silver Line Airways, I want you to know that what happened on this flight is unacceptable. Completely and entirely unacceptable. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention? Wanda touched her left cheek. The welt had deepened to a dark reddish purple. It was tender and warm under her fingertips. I'm fine, Wanda said. But I have a full audio recording of the flight from before boarding through landing. I also have a written incident log with timestamps. She held up the leather notebook. And I believe several passengers have video footage. Carolyn nodded. We'll need all of it. Gerald Henson stood from 1C. He handed Carolyn his business card. Gerald Henson, retired attorney. I witnessed everything from the boarding process onward. I'll provide a full written statement. Tanya Brooks appeared from row 3. Her eyes were still red. I have a statement too. She checked my ID when she didn't check anyone else's. I want that on the record. The couple in row 4 stepped forward. The woman held up her phone. We recorded the incident. From the moment she grabbed the passenger's arm through the slap and everything after. All of it. Carolyn collected contact information from every witness. She wrote each name carefully in her portfolio. Gerald Henson, Tanya Brooks. The couple from row 4, Nathan and Allison Moore. The man from 2B, who had stayed silent too long and now couldn't speak fast enough. Wanda transferred her voice memo file to Carolyn's secure company email before she even left the aircraft. 43 minutes of continuous audio. Every word Brenda had spoken, every refusal of service, every insult. The slap, captured as a sharp crack, followed by dead silence. At the gate, Brenda was seated in a small, windowless office used for crew debriefings. A security officer stood outside the door. Carolyn entered and sat across from her. "You are suspended without pay, effective immediately," Carolyn said, "pending a full investigation into passenger discrimination, verbal abuse, physical assault, and violation of Silverline's passenger dignity policy." Brenda's voice was hoarse from crying. She leaned forward in the plastic chair. "It was a misunderstanding. She was being difficult. I was trying to maintain order in the cabin. I've never had a complaint before." Carolyn opened her portfolio. "You have 6 prior complaints, all filed by passengers of color, all flagged in the system, all closed without action." She paused. "That changes today." Brenda stared at the table. Her fingers twisted a crumpled tissue into a tight white knot. Outside the office, Wanda stood at the gate window looking out at the aircraft she had just left. Her reflection stared back at her. The swollen cheek, the calm eyes, the straight posture that hadn't bent once through the entire ordeal. She pulled out her phone and called Harrison Cole, the CEO of Silverline Airways. He answered on the second ring. "Harrison, it's Wanda. I need to brief you on something that just happened on Flight 1042. She spoke for 4 minutes. Factual, precise. No emotion in her voice, just data and evidence and a clear recommendation. "I want a full, system-wide audit of every discrimination complaint filed in the last 36 months. Every single one. And I want it on my desk within 2 weeks." Harrison Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You'll have it in 10 days. Wanda hung up. By 6 o'clock that evening, one of the passenger videos had been posted online. By midnight, it had been shared 48,000 times. By the following morning, it had crossed 2 million views. The world was about to find out what happened on Flight 1042. The video hit the internet like a match dropped into gasoline. By Tuesday morning, 48 hours after landing, the footage had crossed 11 million views. The clip was 41 seconds long. Brenda grabbing Wanda's wrist, the slap, the stunned silence, Brenda pointing and shouting about security. 41 seconds that captured everything words could never explain. The hashtag started on Twitter. 3 words, #JusticeForWanda. Within 6 hours, it was trending nationally. CNN ran the story Tuesday afternoon. They played the clip twice and interviewed an aviation law expert who said the conduct could constitute criminal assault under Georgia law. NBC followed that evening with a second video from a different angle in row 4. This one was worse. It showed the full buildup, the ignored call button, the slammed overhead bin, the contempt on Brenda's face before the slap. The second video proved the first wasn't an isolated moment. It was the climax of a pattern. By Wednesday, every major outlet had the story. Washington Post, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, USA Today, local affiliates in 38 markets. The conversation had grown beyond one flight attendant and one passenger. It was about a system that let someone like Brenda accumulate 6 complaints without consequence. Inside Silverline's headquarters in Dallas, Wanda sat at the head of a conference table. Across from her were Carolyn Davis, the chief legal counsel, and 2 internal affairs investigators. 6 folders were stacked in the center of the table. Each one contained a prior complaint against Brenda Caldwell. Wanda opened the first, filed 14 months ago by a black businessman. Brenda had refused him a meal and questioned his seat assignment. Marked, resolved, no action. Second folder, 11 months ago, a Latina mother with an infant. Brenda questioned her ticket and told her to move seats. Marked resolved, verbal counseling. 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Different passengers, different flights, different cities. Same flight attendant, same behavior, same result. Nothing. Wanda closed the last folder. 6 complaints, 6 passengers of color, 0 consequences. How? Carolyn met her eyes. Handled at the regional level. Station supervisors reviewed them individually. Nobody connected the dots. Nobody looked, Wanda said. There's a difference. The investigation concluded Friday. Brenda Caldwell had engaged in racially discriminatory behavior over 14 months, physically assaulted a passenger, and filed a false report. She had violated 11 sections of the crew conduct manual. The recommendation was unanimous. Termination. Effective immediately. Brenda received the call at her apartment in Arlington. Her employment was terminated for cause. Credentials revoked. System access disabled. Her name was flagged in the industry-wide database maintained by the Air Transport Association. She would not work in commercial aviation again. But the consequences kept building. The Fulton County District Attorney announced formal charges the following Monday. Simple battery under Georgia Code Section 16-5-23. A misdemeanor, but under the most public spotlight imaginable. Brenda's attorney called it an unfortunate misunderstanding. The internet responded by replaying the second video. There was nothing to misunderstand. 2 weeks later, Wanda filed a civil lawsuit. Assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, violation of civil rights. Her attorney told reporters the suit was not about money. It was about creating a legal record that this behavior carries real consequences. Wanda gave one interview. One. She sat in a quiet Atlanta studio in a navy blouse, with the fading bruise still visible on her cheek. The journalist asked what she wanted people to remember. Wanda paused. Then she said, "Not that a VP got slapped. That this happens every day to people without a title, without a recording. People who file complaints that vanish into folders nobody opens. That's who this is really about." The interview was viewed 14 million times in its first week. 6 weeks after Flight 1042, Brenda stood in a Fulton County courtroom. She pleaded no contest to simple battery. The judge sentenced her to 12 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory anger management, and a racial bias education course. She was permanently barred from commercial aviation. The judge added a formal finding that the assault was motivated by racial prejudice. Brenda left through a side door. Cameras followed her to the car. She did not speak. She did not look up. Gerald Henson wrote an opinion piece for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The headline, "I watched a woman get slapped for being black in first class. I almost said nothing." He wrote about the moment he saw Brenda question Wanda's boarding pass and felt uncomfortable, but stayed quiet. He wrote about the seconds of hesitation after the slap before he finally stood. He wrote that silence in the presence of injustice is not neutrality. It is participation. The essay was shared over 200,000 times. Tanya Brooks launched a social media page called Flying While Black, a space for Black travelers to share their experiences with airline discrimination. 500,000 followers in 3 months. A recognized voice in the national conversation within 6. Wanda's system-wide audit was completed in 9 days. It revealed that discrimination complaints from passengers of color were closed without action at 3 times the rate of complaints from white passengers. Under her authority, Silverline implemented sweeping reforms. Mandatory 2-day anti-bias training developed with civil rights consultants. Cabin cameras on every aircraft. An anonymous crew reporting hotline. A restructured complaint process with corporate-level review and pattern analysis. A congresswoman from Georgia referenced the case in a House Transportation Committee hearing. She held up a screenshot of the video and called for federal legislation mandating anti-discrimination training across the commercial airline industry. One flight, one slap, one recording, and an entire industry is forced to look in the mirror. 3 months later, Wanda Palmer stood at a podium inside Silverline Airways corporate headquarters in Dallas. The room was packed. 400 employees filled every seat. Camera crews from 2 local stations stood along the back wall. The Silverline logo glowed on a massive screen behind her. Harrison Cole, the CEO, stepped to the microphone first. "It is my privilege to announce that Wanda Palmer has been appointed Chief Operating Officer of Silverline Airways. She is the first Black woman to hold this position in the history of this company." The room erupted. Applause rolled through the auditorium in waves. People rose from their seats, not politely, not gradually. They stood all at once like a tide lifting every boat in the harbor. Wanda waited for the applause to fade. She adjusted the microphone. She looked out across the room. Pilots, flight attendants, ground crew, mechanics, gate agents, corporate staff, the people who made an airline fly. "Thank you," she said, "but I didn't take this job for the title. I took it because of what I saw on Flight 1042. Not just what happened to me, but what happened around me. The passengers who looked away. The crew member who stayed silent because she was afraid. The 6 complaints that sat in folders and collected dust while a pattern of cruelty continued unchecked." She paused. The room was completely still. "We don't fix that with a press release. We don't fix it with a hashtag. We fix it by building a culture where every single person on every single flight is treated with dignity, not because of who they might be, but because of who we are." Under Wanda's leadership, Silverline's passenger satisfaction scores among minority travelers increased 40% within the first year. Discrimination complaints dropped by 61%. The anonymous crew reporting hotline received over 300 tips in its first 6 months, each one reviewed, tracked, and resolved at the corporate level. For the first time in the airline's history, there was accountability at every altitude. Donna Sweeney completed the new anti-bias training program. She requested a transfer to the crew mentorship division. She told Carolyn Davis during her exit interview that she had spent 14 months watching Brenda mistreat passengers and saying nothing. She said that silence was the thing she was most ashamed of in her entire career. She wanted to make sure no new flight attendant ever made the same choice she did. Gerald Henson's opinion piece was selected for inclusion in a university journalism textbook. He received letters from across the country, from people who had witnessed injustice and stayed quiet, and from people who wished someone had stood up for them. He answered every single one. Tanya Brooks was invited to speak at a national civil rights conference in Washington, D.C. She stood on stage wearing the same Howard University sweatshirt she had worn on Flight 1042. She told the audience that the day she watched Wanda get slapped was the day she stopped being afraid to use her voice. Her Flying While Black page now had over 1 million followers and had been cited in 3 congressional hearings on transportation equity. 6 months after the incident, on a bright Tuesday morning, Wanda boarded a Silverline flight from Dallas to New York, first class, seat 2A. She was dressed simply, linen trousers, a cream blouse, no flashy jewelry, same as always. A young flight attendant, new, fresh out of training, greeted her at the cabin door with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Palmer. It's an honor to have you with us today. Can I get you anything before we take off?" Wanda smiled. She settled into her seat and looked at the young woman's name tag. "Thank you, Sarah. And please, make sure every passenger on this plane gets that same welcome." The attendant nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Every single one." Wanda leaned back in her seat. The engines hummed beneath her. The cabin filled with passengers. All shapes, all shades, all stories. Through the oval window, the morning sun was climbing above the tarmac, painting the runway in long, golden streaks that stretched all the way to the horizon. She closed her eyes. She thought about her mother in Tuskegee, her father in the control tower, the little girl who grew up watching her parents fight quietly and daily for the right to be treated as equals in rooms that didn't want them there. That little girl was now the most powerful person in this airline. And the sun kept rising. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if it made you angry, or made you think, or made you want to do better, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, hit that bell, because we tell stories that the world needs to hear. And remember this, respect is not a reward for status. It is the minimum every human being deserves. No exceptions, no conditions, no excuses.